I want to welcome everyone tonight to our NAMI Family Forum. We're spending the evening together during our Thanksgiving week, so I really appreciate your taking the time this week to join us. I hope that you find this conversation helpful in our exploration of reimagining public safety in Tompkins County. Our planning committee has been working hard to find some guests that can really give us great insight to how these things occur in mental health crisis response. And tonight we are exploring the legal side of mental health crisis in Tompkins County. This event is being recorded and it will be available on our NAMI Finger Lakes YouTube channel by early next week, probably. I just want to mention that Family Forum is a joint program of NAMI Finger Lakes and Tompkins County Mental Health Services. We invite the community to join us on the fourth Tuesday of each month as we watch presentations or enjoy presentations and discussions regarding mental health programs, services, and advocacy. Tonight we have two volunteers who are assisting with this evening's program. Anna Sombathy is a member of Cornell Health International Student Organization in class of Cornell 2022. And then NAMI volunteer Nathan Roman will be helping with meeting logistics. Sure. Oh, there's Nathan. Yeah. Anna is going to be our moderator this evening. So I am going to turn things over to her now.
Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to welcome you all to this month's NAMI Family Forum, and thank you all for coming. We have 4 panelists this evening, each of whom I'm going to briefly introduce. So the panelists joining us tonight are the Honorable Judge Seth Peacock of the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court, Honorable Judge Scott Miller of the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court, Ms. Kristen Snyder, a senior attorney at Mental Hygiene Legal Services, and District Attorney Matt Van Houten, who is the Tompkins County District Attorney. So our goal for this evening is going to be to discuss 2 overarching questions. One will be, what is each panelist's role with regard to mental health crisis in Tompkins County? And then the second will be, what is their authority in that role and what are their limitations? So I'm going to present each panelist with these questions and allow them some time to answer. So please hold all your questions until all of the panelists have had a chance to speak, and then we'll open up to Q&A later in the program. So for our panelists, please feel free to elaborate and share your thoughts on the overarching questions and provide us with a good understanding of our current response locally. So firstly, Judge Peacock, if you could please address 1, what is your role with regard to mental health in Tompkins County? And 2, what is your authority in that role and what are your limitations?
Great. As you said, my name is Seth Peacock. I'm the Ithaca City Court Judge and I'm presiding over the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court. It was a organization and a court that Judge Miller spearheaded and formed about a year ago. I've been on the bench now about a year, and the court is relatively new, but we're doing some exciting things. I see that our coordinator, Michelle, is on this Zoom as well. So I'm sure she may have a lot to add as well. The first question is, what is your role in helping people experiencing a mental health crisis? I think what we do in Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court is the crisis usually comes when their activities cause them to be charged with a criminal offense. That's the only way that they come before the court. Once they're before the court, we try and use that as an opportunity to provide some of the services that might help them get through living with a mental health issue. So in terms of how we engage with people, it starts off in a negative, usually police interaction that is a difficult, usually, I wouldn't say the worst time in people's lives, but a very difficult time. When they come into court, we try and change the tone a bit. And yes, we know we're in a criminal court. Yes, we know that you have criminal charges pending, but we really try and get to the issues that are causing them to be in that position, and then figure out what services can be provided. Now, the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court is a specialty court. They call it a problem-solving court. They've been in effect for probably 30 years at this point, and they initially started with treatment courts, drug courts. But this court, as I see it in this brief year that I've been presiding over it, is a different model than what was started with the drug courts. The drug courts focused on a compliance model. It was a kind of, comply with the court's orders, and it was a stricter court in that sense. This court, I've been using this word to describe it. It's more of a service court. We're trying to get people into court and then to provide services so that they can engage with that would improve their life. So, for example, on our team, we have the coordinator, Michelle Fulkerson, as I mentioned, but we also have our mental health providers. We have our attorneys who are specialized in working with people living with mental illness. We most importantly, we have a fantastic housing specialist, because many times people come to us and their housing situation is non-existent or unstable. So we have a housing specialist, and then we also have trained members. I don't know what they're officially called, but they're kind of a crisis team. They reach out to folks, they help them get to appointments, they just help them navigate the difficulties that any person would have. So those are the team of people that go out and provide service to our clients. And that's my role, is to lead and kind of organize and set the tone of how we're going to engage with people. The judge can set a tone of compliance and the harshness, but I've really tried to focus on setting a tone of respect and treating the people as people and not just defendants before us, treating the people as people who need services to become better people, not in this cycle of behavior that brings them before the court. And fortunately for me, I have a great team of people that have educated me on how best to approach this. And it's just been a good experience. However, we are young and we're still learning and trying to figure it out, especially when one of our most effective tools is the ability to connect with people, just on a human level. Well, right now, we're having to do that over technology. And sometimes that's really been hard to make that connection, looking through a screen or on a speakerphone or things like that. So we are struggling with that, but we're fully engaged. And one of the first things we did when the courts were basically almost shut down is we had extensive outreach efforts. We were texting people, we were engaged, we wrote letters to them. We really just tried to keep that relationship, because at the end of the day, that's really what the success of our court is going to be based on. And I don't know if I've gone on too long, but I tried to answer the first question.
No, thank you for your response. So I'd now like to ask the same questions of Judge Miller. So just to reiterate, the questions suggest what is your role with regard to mental health crisis in Tompkins County? And then what is your authority in that role? And what are your limitations?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. As I join you from my basement, nice to see everyone. I try to have a very calm background. What do I have? Oh, that is not a real fireplace. The background, but I hope you find it relaxing. So, my name is Judge Scott Miller. I am one of the Tompkins County Court judges. I've been a county court judge in a full-time capacity since January of this year. I had been in an acting county court capacity since 2015. Prior to becoming a full-time county court judge, I was one of the 2 Ithaca City Court judges for 7 years. And I was certainly pleased to have Judge Peacock fill that empty seat, because it's a pleasure to work with him on our mental health court, which we call the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court. In 2016, maybe 2017, as Ithaca City Court judge, Judge Wallace, Judge Rick Wallace, the other Ithaca City Court judge, and I started getting emails and requests from NAMI, for example, is one organization, Tompkins County Mental Health, other stakeholders in the community. Judge Wallace and I received inquiries about the topic of a mental health court. And we were invited to, I think we were invited to one of the NAMI family forums, probably in 2017. And there was a speaker, I believe it might've been the coordinator from the Auburn City Mental Health Court. And that was Judge Wallace's and my first introduction to the topic of a mental health court. And the question had been posed to the judges in Tompkins County, why don't we have a mental health court? And I think Judge Wallace and I looked at each other and we said, well, what's a mental health court? So Judge Wallace and I learned about mental health courts, and we didn't have an answer for why don't we have a mental health court? And as it turned out, as we started to learn about mental health courts and do some research, Ithaca and Tompkins County is one of 10 counties in the 6th judicial district. There are 13 judicial districts throughout New York State, just divided up geographically. We're a very large district geographically, the 6th judicial district. We comprise 10 counties, the surrounding counties. And to our surprise, not a single county in the 6th judicial district had a mental health court yet. Ithaca and Tompkins County is often at the forefront, and Judge Wallace and I decided to reach out to stakeholders and see if there was interest in actually setting up a mental health court. We knew there was interest from NAMI. We knew there was interest from Tompkins County Mental Health Department and a lot of mental health providers. But I reached out to our new district attorney at the time, Mr. Van Houten, and he, being a very progressive district attorney, reflecting the values of Tompkins County and our community, as I think the judges do as well, Matt was interested immediately and became one of the initial planning members. As in May or June of 2018, Matt and I put together a team with the Tompkins County Mental Health Department, probation, the defense attorneys, a few other stakeholders. After actually we met with about 35 stakeholders at the Ithaca City Courthouse, we then put together a planning team of about 10 people, and we started planning for a mental health court because we didn't have an answer for why we didn't have a mental health court. The only answer we could come up with was we needed one, because we were certainly, as a city court judge, I was seeing that many of the same people arrested and rearrested for minor nonviolent offenses, and the only place they were going was the county jail. But what they needed was treatment for untreated mental illnesses, and it was it's the humane response. It's the right thing to do. Jail is not the right thing to do for someone suffering from mental illness. They're our friends, they're our community members, they're our family, they're us. So within about 8 or 9 months, our team had put together what we thought should be the Ithaca Mental Health Court. We named it the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court, and we started receiving participants in May of 2019. And Michelle Fulkerson came from probation. She's our wonderful coordinator. We unfortunately had to go virtual, and within about 8 or 9 months, in March of 2020, Judge Peacock took over as I was the presiding judge through 2019. Judge Peacock took over in January 2020 when I went to county court. However, the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court right now is only available to individuals who are arrested for crimes that have occurred in the city of Ithaca. In the last 8 weeks, we, Judge Peacock, myself, our coordinator, Michelle, and some other team members, we did a training for the town and village judges, so all of the other town and villages in Tompkins County. And our court is now ready to service participants who might get arrested throughout the entire Tompkins County region. So every town and village court, if someone is arrested for a nonviolent misdemeanor and they're suffering from a mental illness, that person is eligible to be screened by our coordinator, Michelle, to participate in our mental health court. And the goal is to divert someone out of jail and divert them into treatment. We found quickly on that our court, our mental health court, it wasn't about just treatment and diverting people out of jail and into treatment, but it was also about finding people housing. Our mental health court quickly became a mental health court / emergency housing court. We found that chronic homelessness was a co-occurring symptom for a lot of our participants. We were the first treatment court to actually bring on a housing specialist from Tompkins Community Action. That was our first one, was Daniel Harrington. And we still have a housing specialist on our team. Our district attorney and myself as the county court judge, and I know our other county court judges, Judge Rowley and Judge Cassidy, we are very interested in expanding what is now really a misdemeanor mental health court. We're interested in expanding it to low-level nonviolent felony offenders over in county court. And we're hopeful that in early 2021, we will expand it to county court, where I would preside over the felony participants. Now, we're doing all of this, of course, with not only not enough resources, but resources that have been cut back because of the pandemic. So this is certainly very challenging, and particularly for our coordinator, who we continue to ask of her to keep doing more with less. And I appreciate that Michelle is joining us this evening. She works 24/7. I tell Michelle, you need to not answer your phone at some point, but 24/7, our coordinator is responding to the any crisis that our participants might be going through. So I really want to single her out for special accolades. She's so important to our community. As a county court judge, I have another role, and I see my wonderful colleague, attorney Kristen Snyder, who is certainly going to be talking quite a bit about that. As the county court judge, I preside over all of our mental hygiene cases. Those are our cases where individuals might be involuntarily committed to the Hugo Medical Center at the Behavioral Services Unit, and they have rights, due process rights to a hearing on whether they should actually continue to be committed over their objection. Attorney Snyder through Mental Hygiene Legal Services would be one of the attorneys that would represent one of our patients in these proceedings. I have to decide whether that patient should continue to be held over their objection, or whether they need to be retained in the hospital and receive mental health treatment over objection. That might even be medication over objection, not just being retained in a hospital setting over their objection, but possibly even compelled to take injections, medication. I also preside over our AOT proceedings. Those are assisted outpatient treatment proceedings, individuals who are not hospitalized, but individuals that might be a danger to themselves, the community, and unless they are court ordered to receive treatment for their a serious mental illness, I have to determine whether they should be court ordered to receive treatment for their mental illness. And often that would be, treatment over their objection, medication, intramuscular injections. So those are the proceedings that I handle as our county court judge.
Thank you, Judge Miller. So Ms. Snyder, if you could also please address the same two questions, just to reiterate, they were, what is your role with regard to mental health crisis in Tompkins County? And then what is your authority in that role and what are your limitations?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So as you said, my name is Kristen Snyder. I am an associate attorney on staff at the Mental Hygiene Legal Service, or MHLS for short. Basically, MHLS as an agency provides legal advice and assistance to people who are receiving care or alleged to be in need of care at inpatient or community-based facilities for individuals with mental disabilities. So as Judge Miller said, basically when people are inpatient at the behavioral science unit at Cayuga Medical Center, they're entitled to certain hearings. So I go in and I tell people their rights to their hearings, and then I represent them in those hearings. So basically, if someone is screened in the emergency department at Cayuga Medical Center, if they could be admitted to the BSU on either a voluntary or an involuntary basis. So a voluntary basis would be, they're asking for their admission to the hospital. So when people are on a voluntary admission, I would meet with them and tell them, explain to them you are in a voluntary admission. So that means you ask for your admission to the hospital. Even though it's voluntary, it's a little deceptive because people often think that they can just leave the hospital. I'm on voluntary, so I could just walk out, this afternoon if I want to. But, that's actually not true. When you're on a voluntary admission at a hospital, a person has the right to request a discharge from the hospital. So the hospital doesn't have to grant that person discharge. If the hospital thinks that the person is somehow not safe to be discharged, then they can request the court's permission to keep that person. And then the person would be entitled to a hearing, and we would see Judge Miller and have a hearing where Judge Miller would decide whether the person should be retained in the hospital or not. If a person is admitted to the hospital on an involuntary legal status, they also have rights to a hearing. So again, I would tell them their rights. If they requested a hearing, we would see Judge Miller and he would make the legal determination with regard to retention. Basically, Judge Miller is looking at any of these legal status. He's basically looking at, is the person a danger to themselves or others? And if he determines that they are, then he's not going to grant their request for release and they're going to remain in the hospital. Let's see. MHLS is part of the appellate division for the their department. So we have field offices in all over, but Albany, Binghamton, Elmira, Kingston, Ogdensburg, Oneonta, Plattsburgh, Tupper Lake. So, we are sort of spanning this area of the state. My office, I work out of the Binghamton office, and I cover Tompkins County, Cortland County, and some of Broome County. So I do travel to the hospitals to see people because they can't come to me. They also do have access to the phone, and my office number and my name is posted by every phone at Cayuga Medical Center at the BSU. So people have access to that and can call me at any time. With regard to, I know we're kind of talked a lot about the mental health court here, just so it's not confused. My office does not provide legal representation to people in the mental health court. So that would be a criminal defense attorney, just so we're not confused about that. We're actually not going into the mental health court to provide representation to people. Our representation is sort of limited to these people if they're inpatient at the hospital. Just to sort of expand on what Judge Miller said, also while people are in the hospital, they do have the right to refuse medication, as Judge Miller mentioned. My office would be providing representation to people If the hospital thinks someone needs medication, they would apply to the court to have that person treated over their objection, and my office would represent people in those type of hearings. We also provide the representation in the assisted outpatient treatment, or AOT, proceedings. That would be where my office also provides representation in those types of hearings that Judge Miller mentioned.
Kristen, let me add, just because our panelists, I'm sure, have never watched one of these proceedings since they are confidential. Ideally, these hearings are held at the courthouse. I do prefer our patient to come to the courthouse because we will take testimony. Usually the hospital will call the treating psychiatrist, and we have two great treating psychiatrists right now up at Hugo Medical Center, Dr. McGee and Dr. Lohman. So the patient will actually witness their treating psychiatrist testify and talk about their mental illness and what treatment the doctor is recommending. The patient will have an opportunity to testify. Attorney Snyder will cross-examine the psychiatrist to determine whether there are any weaknesses in the hospital's case, to determine whether the hospital can carry the burden, which is clear and convincing evidence. And the patient gets to watch all of this. And most importantly, the patient has an opportunity to participate in this hearing. And often the patient doesn't have to, but Kristen, I'd say most of the time your client wants to testify. And that's a very powerful experience. Whether I rule in the hospital's favor or in the patient's favor, and frankly, ruling in the hospital's favor is often ruling in the patient's favor, because many of the patients aren't aware and don't have insight into their serious mental illness. But it can be a really, it's not just a legal proceeding. I don't view it that way. I view these hearings as a very important part of a patient's therapy and treatment. And often we can help the patient improve their relationship with their treating psychiatrist. And in these proceedings, and Kristen, you and I have seen it many times, the patient outside of the hospital setting, seeing that there's a neutral, hopefully they perceive me as a fair judge who's listening, that the patient will start revealing and testifying about things that the doctor was not aware of, and the patient and the doctor start a rapport and sometimes even a conversation in the courtroom, and that helps with the patient's treatment. If the patient has to go back to the hospital, they now know that the doctor will hear them and is listening to them, when maybe they had perceived in the secure environment, in the lockdown environment of Hugo Medical Center, they don't trust anyone. So it's a trust building hearing as well. So I just like to give you a little sort of flavor of what it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. It does give people sort of a power over their situation that they didn't feel like they had before a hearing. And I think that does happen even if Judge Miller doesn't rule in what they believe to be their favor. And I should also add that the services at MHLS are free to people in the hospital. So nobody is paying us. So just want to put that out there too. So if somebody is hospitalized and they want our services, they should call us.
And I would say of the almost 8 years that I've been on the bench, the hearings where, Kristen, you might have done this hearing, but without revealing any confidential information. But when a 75-year-old retired Ithaca College professor is called to the stand to testify, and a question is posed by one of the attorneys, tell me about your son. And the son is a 45-year-old man who's the patient who wants to get out of the hospital. And the father testifies, well, I have two sons. The first son, my first son, is that little boy that I held every night, and I bathed him, and I read to him every night, and I taught him how to play baseball, and I went fishing with him, and we held hands, and we were affectionate. and we did everything together. And I thought we had a fulfilling father and son relationship, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. That's my first son. My other son is seated there, and his mother, my wife, and I are terrified of him, and he needs help, and we want our first son back. I don't know if you were the attorney in that hearing, Kristen. It might have been before you, but I will tell you, if you don't break down and tear up, and if that doesn't affect you, then you just got cold in your heart, because that's when it hit me of how mental illness impacts everyone, friends, the community, neighbors, parents.
Thank you guys for your responses. Attorney Snyder, did you have any other final thoughts before I continue to?
Oh, no, not right now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you both. Finally, I'd like to ask Mr. Van Houten to reflect upon the same two questions. Again, just to reiterate, it'll be, what is your role with regard to mental health crisis in Tompkins County? And then what is your authority in that role, and what are your limitations?
Sure, thanks. So my name is Matt Van Houten. I'm the district attorney. I'm about to start my second term on January 1st. My role is as the prosecutor. I am the head prosecutor, and I have a team of assistant district attorneys who work for me. And our responsibility is, number one, to prosecute criminal cases, but more broadly and more importantly, our responsibility is public safety. So thinking about public safety, it's not necessarily served by incarceration or by being punitive. It is, in my view, better served, and the community is better served by helping people, by addressing the issues that cause people to come into contact with the criminal justice system. And those issues are typically substance abuse or mental health diagnoses. We have a substance abuse treatment court system that's been in place for over a decade, but we haven't had a real system to help people with mental health diagnoses whose primary struggle is mental health related. So I was really enthusiastic about the concept of mental health court when we started planning for it in 2018, because it's another way to divert people away from the punitive side of the criminal justice system. Our goal is to help the individuals who come into our offices by identifying their needs and by providing the services that they need and the stability that they need. And for someone with a mental health diagnosis, if we can help them connect with the services and support, and it may be their family, it may be the team from Wellness and Recovery Court, that promotes public safety, because that individual is doing what they need to do to be healthy, to be happy, to be safe, and therefore they are in a period of stability that doesn't require them to be out in the criminal justice system. So as a prosecutor, my role is to endorse or embrace our role in the specialty court system, and specifically Wellness and Recovery Court. We are consistently looking at individuals once they come into our office in the context of having been arrested or having been in some criminal justice interaction. We want to identify individuals who are candidates for a Wellness and Recovery Court, just as we would identify individuals who are struggling with substance abuse issues. And we want to divert them away from the traditional prosecution model. We want to help them connect with the specialty courts. And by doing that, we're accomplishing our goal. We want to divert people away in any way possible, and something that hasn't really been talked about so far, because it's really not a judicial model, but it is something that the community, I think, should be very interested in, is the law enforcement assisted diversion, or LEAD program. And the key term in that is diversion, in the sense that individuals are actually diverted before they are arrested. They never come into the court system. And that is specifically designed to identify people who are in a position where they could be arrested. And they're in that position because of some of the issues that we've talked about: substance abuse, homelessness, poverty, and mental illness. And if that person can be connected with a caseworker, then they are never arrested. And that's something that I think the city of Ithaca will implement in the next 12 months, hopefully sooner. We've been talking about it for a long time, but that's another tool that we have as a community that I think can really accomplish our goal of, the last thing we want to do is punish someone because they have a struggle that they can't control, that they need help with. So, the extent of my power in that role is, you can't force someone to do something they're not willing to do. People have to be willing and interested and willing to commit to the responsibilities of engaging with these treatment courts. And some people aren't. And when they're not, then then we have to look at other. We try to look up the least intrusive, least punitive way to help them, and sometimes it is more structured things in the court system, probation, for example. But jail is the absolute last resort. And I should say that with regard to some individuals who are struggling with mental illnesses, the individuals who commit violent crimes, those who actually do physically endanger the safety of our community, these are not the individuals that we're talking about for wellness court, but there are also ways to identify and to address those issues and those challenges. And we aren't necessarily looking to put someone who committed a violent crime due to a mental illness in jail or prison, but we want to keep the community safe, and that might mean that they end up in a psychiatric facility. And those are other processes that my office is involved with. We identify individuals who may not be able to understand or participate in their own defense. And that's something that the judges would be able to talk about as well. That's called a 730 examination, where that individual would be identified as someone who really, they're in the court system, but they don't know how to help themselves. They can't listen to their attorney. They can't help their attorney. So that person is somebody that we don't want to just say, okay, well, they don't know what's happening, but we're still going to prosecute them as if they did. So we want to help that individual either become able to help in their own defense and to understand, and that happens at a psychiatric facility, or if they can't do that, then the system continues to help them towards that goal. So I guess hopefully that's an answer to the questions.
Hey, Anna,
Yes.
this is Judge Peacock. Can I just respond and I guess expand on some of what District Attorney Van Houten just said, especially regarding the LEAD initiative. One of the questions is, what about our limitations? And if you look at it and you step back for a minute, and you have a court system, especially here in city court, where probably our number one limitation is our jurisdiction is about misdemeanors. So a typical case would come in, it could be a shoplifting case, it could be a criminal mischief case where someone damages property, breaks a window, for example, something like that. Typically, a case like that would involve some type of sanction or penalty, usually not jail, especially if there's not a significant criminal history. So here we have this strange artificial situation where we have someone put into the criminal justice system where the hammer that the judge has is incarceration or a fine or something like that. In a typical case, a person living with mental illness comes in, they participate in our court, and it's great and it's progressive. However, underlying the whole thing is this idea that I better listen to that judge because they have the ability to put me into a cage. There's probably not, I see Susan's on this line, there's probably not a therapist or a treatment provider worth anything that would recommend, hey, the most effective way to treat people with mental health is to have this threat of you do what we say or I'm going to put you in jail. And we can cover it with a velvet glove and I can be respectful and nice to people, but at the end of the day, I know in this system, once you're before the judge, that's kind of the dynamic. And first of all, the first question is it fair that a person not living with mental illness would simply be given a $200 fine and told to fix the person's window or mailbox through restitution? But because now I have a person living with mental illness, I'm going to then say, hey, by the way, you broke the same window, but now you're going to spend a year with the constant threat of some type of sanction hanging over your head. And is that a valid and viable way to approach the problem? So I like what District Attorney Van Houten said, is brought this other thing. Wait a minute, is the court even the appropriate place for many of these cases? Is the lead option something we should do? So I wanted to raise that issue. And then another thing we should probably talk about is the idea, and we kind of talk about it as if it's automatic, but the idea that, and we have this setup right now, there's a mental health court, and then we have a drug treatment court in the same building. And my experience thus far, and my experience as an attorney, was that those two things often are connected. So why are we setting up a structure where we act as if the mental health issue is separate from a drug addiction issue or an alcohol abuse situation? They're really connected. I don't have the numbers, but I can say in my experience as an attorney, as a judge, the two are often connected. So what I find myself, and when I work with Michelle, we find ourselves oftentimes evaluating participants for both courts. And then we have these strange discussions about, well, what percentage of their mental health caused their criminal charges versus, their drug addiction. And it's an impossible, silly, ridiculous conversation in a lot of ways, because if you look at their history, you'll see a history of substance abuse, and then you'll see a history of mental health. And it's not an uncommon experience where people self-medicate based on their mental health situation. So it's, you talk about limitations, that's kind of a structural limitation, but then what Attorney Van Houten, DA Van Houten raised is this lead thing, is the question of, well, should we even be in a criminal court setting where the motivation to do the right thing, get these services, get your housing, is this threat that the court can use. And lastly, I'll say, and Michelle knows this, in terms of my credibility as a judge and gaining credibility with the participant in our program, the first thing that I usually get credibility on is if they're in housing crisis, we have a housing coordinator. And guess what? Within a couple weeks, a month, they have stable housing. And that little bit of action on our part really cements the relationship for the next year, where they begin to trust us and say, wait a minute, I was homeless or was having housing difficulties before I came here, and this team of people got me out of that situation. So it's kind of a give and take, and it really establishes a trusting relationship going forward.
Thank you, Judge Peacock. And also thank you, District Attorney Van Houten. Now that you've heard all of your colleagues speak, I just want to open it back up to the panelists, like if anyone has any final thoughts to share before we enter Q&A.
I think Judge Peacock hit it on the head when he said that we want to be fair. We have to be fair to everyone involved. And I think the key that we have to remember with any of these treatment courts is that they are with what we call ATIs, which is an alternative to incarceration. Someone who has never been involved in the criminal justice system would probably get their case dismissed, whether they have issues that are causing them to be in the court or not. But we're really trying to focus on the individuals who we see again and again, who are struggling and need that additional stability that we can provide through the court system.
So if there aren't any further thoughts, thank you all for participating. I'd like to now move on to the Q&A portion of the panel and open the floor up to some questions from guests, and Ms. McGee will outline the chat details and the how to speak up.
Yes. Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to all of our panelists. It's really terrific to get this much information in one place with all of you together. So we really appreciate that. So I will, if people can please use the raise hand feature. And if you need to find that, it's in your, I believe it's in the participants list. So if you scroll over the bottom of your screen and open up your participants list, there should be just a row of little buttons, and raise hand should be in there. I will keep the panelists unmuted so they can answer freely. But if you use the raise your hand feature, your name will come to the top of that participants list and we can unmute you so you can ask your question. If you're not comfortable asking a question, feel free to open the chat. That chat button should be right near the participants button at the bottom. And you can send a chat to, you can only chat to the host. So please send your question to me, and then I will get your question to our moderator to ask. So I'm going to go ahead and ask to unmute Marla Byrnes.
Beth, thanks so much for setting this up, and certainly the folks from Tompkins County Mental Health that you guys do this family forum. I just am grateful to I'm grateful to all the folks there, certainly on the panel, some of the folks that have helped my son. And I'm grateful that Tompkins County is ahead of the curve on trying to help persons with mental illness who struggle with mental illness, addictions, homelessness, because certainly my son has experienced all that. And I just really appreciate what you do, because it does make a difference. And I know you talked about, Michelle put in lots of hours in that commitment. And I know Rich Shaw, he's always been available to answer any questions. And just that compassion and passion for helping people who struggle, and really helping their families, because mental illness doesn't just impact the person with the illness, it impacts the whole family. And unfortunately, because the way our laws are set up about treatment, and the person has to be a danger to themselves or others, often, to get a person in the hospital, keep them in the hospital. A person can be so seriously ill and not be hospitalized, and families burn out, families get tired. And so any efforts to help people before they get in serious trouble, to help people to have housing. You all are doing an incredible job of really serving your community, and I thank you. So I don't have a question. I just wanted to, again, thank the folks there in Tompkins County who are doing everything they can to be helpful to my son, and I appreciate that. So thank you, and thank you, Beth, again, for NAMI Finger Lakes leading the way on a lot of this too.
Thank you, Marla.
So one question that came in was, does it seem correct to have a person's name published in the media when they have mental health crisis and engagement with the law? What can we do about that? Just in general towards the panelists.
Yeah, I'll answer that with freedom of the press and the First Amendment. If someone is arrested, the public has a right to know, at least under our Constitution, our federal Constitution and our state Constitution. It's unfortunate that sometimes that individual might be mentally ill, and that's the reason they may have been arrested. But I don't. There's the First Amendment is going to take precedence over that individual's right to privacy, unfortunately.
And I'll just add to what Judge Miller said, sort of, with the hearings that people are having if they're inpatient, the behavior in the BSU. I think Judge Miller may have mentioned this earlier, but those hearings are sealed; they're not open to the public, and so that's not something that people can access.
Oddly, our court is open to the public. It's an open criminal court, and you might say, well, that's it's a problem in terms of people's privacy and things like that. I tend to try and view it a different way, in that obviously everyone on this call here probably recognizes the stigma of that mental health has had, and some of that can be challenged by being open about it, and who struggles, and it's not some isolated group of people. As Judge Miller said, it's family, friends, so it's pretty broad. And one of the things I was doing before we weren't allowed to come into court as openly as we were was I was having community members, be it the mayor, be it people on the county legislature, open our court session with a brief introduction of who they were, and to make that connection and saying, listen, the work that you guys are doing in this program is important to the whole community. You're part of the community. So to address that stigma issue. So I get your question, but I think the more to a certain extent open we can be about it, it removes that stigma and allows us to effectively address some of the issues in an open, more positive way.
Thank you all for your responses. Another question came in. How many people have been served through the Wellness and Recovery Court?
I have Michelle on the line here, and even though she's not working, I think currently we have about 15, and I know that prior we have, I think, 5 who are being screened at this point, and I know that Judge Miller had a number of that before I began, so I could take a guess, Michelle, but you were here from the start, so you probably know a lot better than I would.
Well, I mean, 15 right now, as far as active people, active participants in the court. We just graduated 2 of our first participants back in September, which was really awesome to be a part of. And yeah, so yeah, about 15, 16 active people right now who are fully in the wellness court. And we have about 5, 6 folks that they're being screened, or they're kind of still in that referral process on whether they're coming to us or or not. So yeah, that's about the running average. I would say is about 15 people.
What would you say over our first 18 months, Michelle? I know some people haven't graduated the program and they have been discharged from it, but
Yep.
we'll certainly welcome them back.
Mhm.
You know, if it's unfortunate enough that they get rearrested. Would you say 30 to 40 individuals served by the court in?
Hold on, I'm going to pull it up for you because I have a spreadsheet. So since our onset of May 1, 2019, we have dealt with 53 people. We've gotten 53 referrals. And we've engaged with them on some level, each one of those people. So,
I apologize
Thank
that
you.
I 35 or 40.
yeah, 53.
Thank
And
you, Michelle.
we have people too that like, so we have one individual who came to us when we first started. He was referred, things did not go well, and then got referred again, and he's doing amazing. So we definitely are the court of second chances and third chances, just because somebody may have come in, you know, and didn't do great, or said, you know, thanks, but no thanks, this isn't for me, and decided to go the criminal track. They can come back. We've had somebody who's been on a warrant for almost a year. She's just been gone. And she's back, and she's, you know, as it seems right now, you know, is handling her business, and we're there, and we still have open arms, and all right, let's figure this out and get you where you need to be. And she's somebody who has the capacity to do well. She disappeared for a year. So, and she didn't get sent to jail. When, you know, other people in that position, other courts in that position, if you've had somebody abscond for a year, you going to jail. You know, like, but we can look at people objectively, and I think that that's important. It's an important part of our court.
Thank you, Michelle. Our NAMI Finger Lakes treasurer, Howard Reed, has a question he'd like to ask.
The wellness court is clearly a huge advance in redirecting to treatment individuals with mental health problems who have been arrested. The question is being asked both locally here and around the U.S. as to whether a next step might be approaches which would avoid or prevent individuals experiencing mental health crises from being arrested and criminally charged in the first place. And I wanted to ask panelists, especially as it relates to interactions between those individuals and police during mental health crisis events. I wanted to ask the panelists if they had any recommendations about services or approaches that they think could potentially accomplish that goal. And District Attorney Van Houten has talked about one thing which it seems potentially could do that, the LEAD program, which is something that some of you may be familiar with. I know it's not something that I'm familiar with. So a question specifically about that program would be, is it something that could potentially be available to individuals in crisis and might help prevent them from being, you know, arrested and charged in the first place? And beyond that program, again, for the other panelists, are there additional ideas or recommendations that you have which might accomplish that goal?
So let me start off, if I could, to say yes, LEAD would absolutely be a way to divert those individuals in crisis away from the criminal justice system. But beyond that, Beth mentioned the reinventing or reimagining public safety. That is the process that our county is required to undergo between now and April of 2021. I'm serving on one of the working groups of the county/city task force that is trying to undertake this task. And a lot of what we've done so far is look at that exact issue, is what is happening across the country There's in Eugene, Oregon, there's a Cahoots program that is a mobile team of civilian mental health professionals that go out instead of the police. There are lots of different models that we're looking at and collecting information right now about how we can respond as a community to mental health calls without the police being directly involved. And I think we have to do that as a community. The form that it will take is still being discussed, but I think that it's in our community's best interests. So many times you hear about an individual who is in crisis and the police, without intending to do so, they exacerbate the problem. When people show up in uniform with guns, that is not something that necessarily calms the situation. And I think we recognize that in the working group that I'm working on. That's all being run by a group called the Center for Policing Equity, which is a not-for-profit organization that's volunteering their time to facilitate all these discussions. But we're talking about this very seriously, and something is going to happen. Obviously, it requires money. And the budget was just passed for the county and the city for 2021, and nothing was in that budget for this type of expense. But we have to find a way to fund that program, whatever it looks like in the long run. We have to.
So another quick follow-up question that came in was, what are some of the needs that are not easily being met in our community that make this approach more difficult?
Well, I think housing is probably the biggest need in the community that makes everything else more difficult.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, even for people that are hospitalized, housing is a huge issue for people. The hospital, the social workers at the hospital are even, sort of working overtime to work on that housing issue there as well. But housing is a huge issue for people.
And to follow up with what you've just said, Kristen, how many times do we have a hearing where the patient is improving, it's starting to engage in treatment at the hospital, it's starting to get insight into this how seriously mentally ill they are, is agreeing to take their medication under the supervision of a psychiatrist, is starting to feel a little better. But since the patient has input in their own discharge plan, they'll testify, well, I have no place to go. But I plan on checking in at the shelter when I'm released. And without the component of some safe, stable housing to go to, it's a real problem.
Yeah, I think Lakeview has been really great in the community because it can provide really stable housing for people, but of course it's limited. There's only so many beds.
Thank you. I have a question. The Reimagining Public Safety Collaborative has provided this a form online, and they're asking the public a general overarching question, what we think. And the question that they have, and the one I'm going to pose to the panelists, is what do we need to know in order to reimagine public safety in Ithaca and Tompkins County? And I'm wondering about what your personal feelings are on that, of course, given your professional experience.
If I could take a shot at trying to answer that, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the limitations, which are raised by this question. What are your limits in that role? as progressive or as thoughtful as this approach is, it's limited. Number one, it's a voluntary program, right? So no one has to engage with us at all. They, you know, again, it's that velvet glove of, well, engage with us, please, or we'll give you a more negative consequence. So if it's voluntary, some people struggling and living with mental illness are simply going to say, nope, give me my 30 days, give me my $500 fine, I'm out of here. I have no interest in participating in this whatsoever. Now, you know, so the limitation is just how do we get people to engage in a structure that's authoritarian, a bit oppressive at times, and you know, so although we're offering this as a progressive solution, you know, the program that DA Van Houten, the Eugene Cahoe's program, is perhaps something that we need to explore a lot harder, because like you said, just as a judge has limited tools in terms of being effective, officers sometimes have those same limited tools, and you can often get into an authority situation on the street. So I just pose that idea, throw that out there.
Thank you.
I think it's such a complex problem to be looking at with a lot of different facets, including the financial facet of, you know, how do we pay for the changes and the programs that we want to implement, but, you know, changing the model, the paradigm that has been in place for so long, the traditional police response is not something you can just flick a switch and accomplish. So I think we all have to be invested in this as a long-term process that will be for the best interests of the community, for everyone in the community. And, you know, just commit that if you're looking for something to happen overnight, it's not going to happen. But if we keep at it and we keep talking about it and we keep experimenting and figuring out, you know, trying new things, we can make it happen, and we can certainly improve.
Thank you. Does anyone else have questions? If you do, please raise your hand or ask the question in chat. Okay, I guess I have some questions that I would ask then. I'm wondering how closely you work with facilities that are not in our community. We don't have any hospital other than, not that it's not a good one. I'm just saying that in order for like a pretty intense psychiatric treatment, there are hospitals around this area that may be differently equipped to approach that. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how that process works and what that process looks like if someone is in need of more intense treatment or is part of, I guess I could backtrack a little bit. Prior to the mental health court, a person may be transferred through a 730 review, possibly, to a psychiatric forensic unit somewhere. And at this point, my understanding from what you're saying is that that process looks very differently because now we have this other thing in place, a different approach in place. So do you still work the same way with these other facilities in order to get someone more the word is escaping me, something more than what they can get locally in our local hospital?
So Beth, I think I can speak to if someone's hospitalized locally at Cayuga Medical Center. Cayuga Medical Center is an acute care facility. So they're not keeping or, meant to keep people long-term. They're sort of running the same groups for people, each week. And so once someone's been there a couple of weeks, they've pretty much reached the maximum of their treatment at the hospital. In most cases, not all cases, but if the hospital thinks that someone needs longer term stabilization, they will make a referral to a state hospital. The catchment area for Ithaca is going to be either Binghamton or Elmira. They're depending on where you live, you have different catchment areas for these state hospitals. Because if you live in Ithaca, you don't want to be sent to a state hospital in New York City, for example, because it's not close to home and your family can't really be involved. So if the hospital makes a referral or wants to make a referral to one of the state hospitals, a person has sort of three options. They can consent to the transfer to the state facility. Or if they object to the transfer, they can have sort of a what's called an administrative hearing that's done internally within the hospital, where the person meets with the hospital administrator and the doctor will say why they think it's in the person's best interest to be transferred. And then the person has an opportunity to respond. My office will also represent that person in that hearing. We call it a hearing. It's more like a meeting, no one's objecting, and it's not like being in a courtroom. If the hospital administrator thinks that the person should be transferred and that it's in their best interest, the person could be transferred over their objection. In the alternative, the person has the right to ask for the court hearing, where they would go before Judge Miller and say, I don't think that I need to be hospitalized at all. I'm asking to be released from the hospital. And so, as we talked about before, Judge Miller would make that decision. And if the person is retained in the hospital, essentially the court is saying that they need longer term stabilization, and then the person is going to be transferred over their objection. That's different than the 730 process, where you're trying to sort of regain capacity for someone that's been determined to not have capacity. MHLS doesn't necessarily get involved in that 730 process until after there's a ruling that the person doesn't have capacity. And then at that point, they would be moved to a forensic unit. I think our closest forensic unit is Rochester. And then we divide up MHLS. Our third department here, we don't handle that. So there's an MHLS in Rochester that would go in and see that person.
So that actually, that opens another question for me. That's a very complex role that you play, Kristen, and I'd actually like to understand that better. So where you are representing the person who may be hospitalized or is hospitalized, that can look different to people depending on what our goals are for the person. So a person, when it would seem to me, when someone is represented, you're kind of fighting on their side for their rights to do or not do something. And so, but Judge Miller had mentioned that it may not necessarily be in their best interest for them not to be hospitalized. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am their advocate. So their position is my position. So, their position might be different from what the family thinks, or different from what people believe to be in their best interest. And, that's fine. I advocate what their position is. So, like for so for example, for treatment over objections, if someone's not taking medication, the hospital thinks that they need medication, and they apply for a court order to obtain an order to have this person treated with medication over their objection. I think Judge Miller can speak to this, but oftentimes people are so ill that they actually don't even come to court. They won't even show up to fight this, this treatment over objection petition. You know, I still go to court for people, and, you know, my position is, well, if they're not taking the medication, then their position is they don't want to. So that would be my position. You know, even if they don't speak to me, that's still the position that we would take, and we would advocate for them. So it is sort of strange, because sometimes that happens, that people refuse to speak to me. They don't come to court. It doesn't mean that I don't do my job or I do less of a job, you know. And also sometimes I think family will call me and they'll get kind of upset because they want me to share information with them, or they want to have an information exchange. And, you know, I have an attorney-client relationship with people. So what they say to me is confidential. And so I can't just give family information without my client's consent. So, and that's true of minors too. You know, Cayuga Medical Center does have a unit with adolescents. And even if a child is 13, if they haven't given me permission to talk to their parent, then I don't talk to their parent. So, you know, I'm not trying to, when people call me, I'm not trying to be a jerk, you know. I have a client, and I have an obligation and a duty to them.
Thank you.
Can I say just one thing in regards to how we work with different facilities? So I think in wellness court, as many, if not all of our participants have a co-occurring substance use disorder. And many times it comes to, we may have to, the recommendation is that they get inpatient substance use treatment, but we're vetting those facilities to make sure that they also have a really great, like, or at least decent mental health programming as well. They're few and far between in New York State, to be quite honest. We're sending people to Pennsylvania a lot because there's something magical in Pennsylvania where they seem to be able to get it, that they can treat folks with co-occurring disorders, and they're coming back and they're like, it was the best experience I've ever had in my life. You know, they got it, you know, and those are that's the kind of feedback that we're hearing, and we're getting that from the participants, like the actual people that are, you know, having that experience. And I think that's valid, and that it's not some rep coming to us and saying, oh, this is what we can do for your folks. Like, these are actual people who are combating mental illness, you know, and trying to be in recovery, and are going to being sent to these folks, sometimes, you know, not willingly, and coming back to our community and going, that was the best experience I had in my life, because these programs also have a really good mental health component to them. So, I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that we're working with facilities, and it's not just psychiatric facilities, because our folks are not just dealing with mental illness. You know, they're also dealing with co-occurring substance use, and those things need to be treated in tandem.
Thank you, Michelle.
And Beth, our mental health court team, we have a registered nurse social worker on our team, Alexis Sidolowski, who is an expert on the residential treatment facilities throughout New York State and Pennsylvania. She will screen our participants in wellness court and determine and make a recommendation on whether they need treatment more than just outpatient, and if they need a residential treatment facility, often a dual diagnosis facility. She has found some great facilities. The one in Pennsylvania that Michelle mentioned, I can't think of the name off the top of my head. What?
Silver Pines.
Okay, Silver Pines. And so that our mental health court has established a relationship with these residential treatment facilities. So we don't have anything like that in Tompkins County. So we are having to send people all over the state and out of state. But fortunately, we have an expert on our team that has identified some great facilities, taught us about these treatment facilities, and we've established relationships with them.
Thank you.
So an additional question for all the panelists would be, what's the most challenging part of your job? And then what's the most rewarding part of your job?
I'd like to hear what Michelle has to say.
I'm not a panelist. I will answer if you want to hear.
Sure.
Okay. So I think that the most challenging part of my job is still working within systems. These silos that we have, they're just long-standing silos. This is the way we've always done it, so hence we must always do it that way. It becomes very challenging because they see these folks as whole human beings. And like I mentioned just a moment ago, they have wants and dreams and mental illness and maybe a heroin addiction or a meth addiction or an alcohol abuse disorder. And we're still saying, okay, well, you're going to be in either this court or you're going to be in that court. And that gets really frustrating. And I think it sparks a lot of debate amongst ourselves, when we're looking at somebody, who's coming into the court. And because both sides make valid arguments, like, oh no, they belong in Ithaca treatment court, and oh no, but we really need to work on their trauma before we can do this, so let's put them in wellness court. And I don't think that that's how we should be doing that. I think there needs to be a better cohesion, and it's kind of something that I've been talking about with the judges more. I think the most rewarding part of what I do is when I can see somebody who has come, and maybe they were homeless and scared and not trusting anyone and not getting treatment, and I can watch them just become this awesome advocate for themselves. They like reclaim their power in a way, and it makes me tear up like every single time. And it gives me chills because it's like, it's just so amazing to watch. And it's amazing to know that you had a hand in that just by being a human being and being like compassionate and empathetic and actually just listening, that you help them get to that place. So that's probably the best part of my job.
I think you all see why it's been so great, and I've learned so much working with Michelle and the passion she brings to this and the knowledge she brings to this this role as coordinator. It's really helped us become a more effective team. And I can say I'm just a judge in this, and I play an important role, but without that team allowing me to have people go to places they need, support them, it just wouldn't work. The things I struggle with, I think, are balancing, since this is a misdemeanor court, balancing the low-level charges with the consequences, and knowing that many of these charges, if there wasn't this mental health component, would be disposed of relatively quickly. So I always try and balance that idea that, hey, this is a petty larceny. I've had this person, suffer sanctions, or maybe it's jail time or some effect that I know the typical case would have been resolved a lot easier and more quickly. The best thing about this job is making a human connection with our participants. So, oftentimes as judge, you can simply just focus on, did you make your appointments? So you're doing this. But what I try and do is to engage people outside of that as human beings. What do you like to do what are your hobbies, the exchange of information. This is what I like to do. And that's been difficult with using screens all the time. But, you know, that's probably the best thing, is to almost try and get people outside of that setting where they're the defendant, I'm the judge, and say, hey, what are you about? What gives you pleasure? What are you trying to be? What's the hope for yourself, you know, in life, separate from this? You know, what kind of parent are you trying to be? What kind of person are you trying to be? What kind of education are you trying to get? What kind of things are you trying to do? Where are you trying to travel? What do you like to eat? You know, just to meet on that human level. I mean, we all know we're in court, but the joy is meeting on that human level. So that's a good side of the thing, the job for me.
Anyone else?
As long as the next question isn't, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I mean, for me, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes in this role is that when I become involved in a case, no one is happy. Everyone is you know, upset about what has happened, whether it's, you know, a serious crime or whatever the case may be. And I'm forced to make a decision that I think is the best decision I can make and fair. And I try to get as much information as I can and do what's right. And no matter what happens, there's somebody who's mad at me. And, you know, that's just the reality. And I'm comfortable with that because I'm not making decisions that are made lightly or without due diligence. And I'm trying to do the right thing for this individual and for the community. And, you know, conversely, when I see somebody who I've taken a chance on, or who I've tried to be creative with, or who I've really, you know, taken a risk on, and they've taken advantage of that and succeeded, that's really rewarding for me, because that's what the community is about, is making ourselves better and you know, being a community.
Thank you.
I'll give a quick answer to that. I would, the most challenging part of my job is definitely in my role as county court judge at felony sentencings, where based upon the felony conviction, I am required, based upon the level of conviction, to impose a sentence of incarceration. It's going to have to be some term of incarceration. And I have to, after listening to the arguments of the prosecutor and defense counsel and hearing from maybe a victim and hearing from the defendant, I have to pick what is the appropriate consequence for the crime of which this person has been convicted. And I learn from the probation department, I learn from the trial, I learn from the defendant, I learn from the victim. And it's often not disputed that the defendant that I'm about to sentence has a history of mental illness, has suffered childhood trauma, maybe a victim of serious abuse, but nonetheless, the person has been convicted either by a guilty plea or by a jury. And I have to impose a consequence for the crime this person has committed. And I can't just say, I feel bad for this person, I'm sympathetic to this person, and I may be, and I take that into account, but I still have to impose some consequence, which is often a serious sanction. I don't put that out of my head at night after I impose a sentence, I will tell you that. Yeah, and if there are judges who tell you that they've never had a second thought about a sentence they've imposed, well, good for them. I second guess every sentence I impose, and that's the most challenging part of my job. The most rewarding part, I would say the most rewarding part, and Kristen, this is one of the reasons that I volunteered to take 100% of the assignment of all of our mental hygiene cases in Tompkins County. It's not necessarily an assignment that judges ask for, but I really enjoy it. Unfortunately, Kristen, that means you're stuck with just this judge in Tompkins County. But the most rewarding part is when I have to rule against what a patient wants, which is, often Kristen is advocating for the patient to be released immediately. But the patient is so seriously mentally ill, so lacking in insight in their mental illness, so resistant to treatment, completely resistant to having any type of relationship with their psychiatrist. But in the course of the hearing and in listening to the patient, and I talk to our patients. I'll have conversations with them, often not about their hospital stay. If they tell me about art or music or an interest they have, we might have a conversation under oath about that. And when I rule against them, and I do it in front of them, and I explain why I have to rule against them. But in our proceeding, they often begin smiling, and as I've said, they'll start talking to their doctor. They might even be questions back and forth that their doctor, who's no longer testifying, might start having a conversation with them while the patient is on the witness stand. And when I rule against the patient and Kristen is explaining, well, you're going back to the hospital, sometimes they genuinely thank me, and I get the sense that the doctor-patient relationship has been improved. So that's the most rewarding part, when I think I've actually done some good and helped this patient gain some insight into their illness and actually gain some willingness to engage in treatment. And that's really what we want. We want our family members, our friends to get treatment so they can come back home.
Thank you. Kristen, did you have thoughts on that question?
Sure. I'll see if I can kind of quickly answer this. Challenging for me, I think, is that I often see people when they're very ill. And I think I kind of spoke about this earlier, but, sometimes people won't even talk to me. And then I'm having hearings with people that have refused to speak with me or refused to come to court. And that can be very challenging just from a litigation standpoint. Rewarding, I think, as Judge Peacock said, is just making a human connection with people. I find that to be the most rewarding, and just helping people have some power in the process. I find that to be rewarding as well.
Thank you. We have a question from Cynthia Brock, and then we have one more question in chat. And we do want to be respectful of our panelists' time. So I'm going to ask Cynthia, Ithaca Common Council member, Cynthia Brock, I believe.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Cynthia. Yeah, do you want to be on video?
I'm doing this from my cell phone and it won't let me for some reason.
Okay. Go ahead
So
with your
I
question.
apologize for that. First of all,
Sure.
I really appreciate this panel, and it's been wonderful to be able to listen into this conversation and hear about all your experiences and perspectives and engagement around this. Clearly, this is something that our community is paying a lot of attention to. The need for these services and the supports that all of you are providing are just tremendous. And I'm very grateful that we are out in the forefront in really thinking about meeting our constituents where they are and assisting them to help themselves through their healing. One of the things that I have learned, and I wanted to ask this question, is as I interact with various police officers, I often hear officers complain about interacting with individuals who are clearly in having a mental health crisis, that they will take them to Hygiene Medical Center for service. And then that individual will be released, and then they'll be back in the community and the way I hear about it, it's not uncommon to basically play this ping pong with the same individuals over the same day or two, just taking them to community Keoga Medical and being released, which seems so different from what I'm hearing from all of you in terms of what the intent of this mental health service is intending to provide to our residents. So I'm wondering if this may be happening, A, because perhaps there is inadequate outreach to our law enforcement in terms of how to engage in these services, or B, is this happening because these services only get initiated if a misdemeanor or crime has been initiated? Not merely just sort of disrupting the public or things like that.
So I can try to tackle this, Cynthia. That's an excellent question. A lot of times these are independent. These things happen independently of each other. And what I mean by that is that someone might be arrested for a nonviolent crime, and they might be a perfect candidate for a wellness and recovery court, but they also might be in a crisis where the officer determines that they are a risk to themselves and would bring them to the hospital. And that's not, and that's because the officer is trying to, help this individual get the help that they need. And the officer doesn't know what's going to happen when the person gets to the hospital, but the officer is not taking that person to court or to jail because most likely that individual is not eligible to be considered for bail. And we don't want to talk about bail when someone is in a mental health crisis. We want them to get help. But what happens is that the hospital has a different standard in terms of evaluating people. If they're not a risk to themselves, then they are released. So that's where this comes in. But it's not, I mean, the officers are doing the right thing, but there's, if the hospital doesn't have a medical basis to keep the individual, then they're going to release them.
Yeah, Cynthia, this is Judge Peacock here. I think the anecdotes that you've heard do have a basis in reality. I think there's been a philosophical shift regarding hospitalization and what's the appropriate approach. And I think Kristen can probably speak to this a little more, but there's certainly, there's some truth to that, in my experience as judge and attorney, having someone held at CMC is a high standard to meet, and it's not common. And even though, we as lay people might say, well, certainly that person, needs to be held for that period, and that'll be our opinion. That's not often the professional's opinion, and I guess as a layperson, sometimes you struggle with that, as the officers might, but that's where we are now, and I think Kristen can fill us in on the legal basis and the treatment basis for a lot of what happens.
Sure. When someone comes to the hospital for an evaluation, just because they're brought to the hospital by police doesn't mean that they're automatically admitted to the hospital. There's still an evaluation done. And if a person doesn't meet criteria for involuntary admission, then the hospital is not going to admit them. So, basically they need to be somehow a danger to themselves or others. And, sometimes people's perception of how someone could be dangerous to themselves or others doesn't necessarily meet the criteria of what the hospital is evaluating for. And it's not, necessarily like they could potentially be a danger to themselves if such and such and such happens in the community. They need to really be a danger to themselves or others at that moment to be admitted.
Sometimes it's just removing the individual from the circumstances. By the time they get to the hospital, they're calmed down or diffused.
And Cynthia, this is Scott Miller here. So you're exactly right, and what the other panelists have said is correct. The hospital, absolutely, that is exactly the scenario. Once the police officer, who's not charging the person with a crime and who's looking to get that person safe, and our Ithaca Police Department actually has some of the best training in the country about mental illness. We actually, more than 20 years ago, after Michael Padula was killed, we our city was at the forefront of making sure that their officers were received training on dealing with the mentally ill population. So the officer, again, diverting that individual from being arrested, takes the person to the hospital. But if that person in custody presents well to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist is of the opinion that no, this person is not presently a danger to themselves or others, that person, that person's going to be released an hour or two later. That's the big gap. And that person might be homeless. So what happens? That person goes back to the jungle, or that person, uses, drugs later that night. And ironically, we can't really do anything as judges or social workers involved until that person gets arrested for some low-level offense, and then they're in front of a court, and the court can start ordering something. So there was a question about personal feelings. That, unfortunately, I hope 50 or 100 years from now, historians will look back and say how sad in the United States that it was the criminal justice system that was left with dealing with our mentally ill friends and family members. Because really, the criminal justice system, the fact that that we are dealing with this healthcare crisis, the criminal justice system, it's often said, the criminal justice system is often the receptacle for all of our failed public policies. The ultimate answer, I think we all know, is not the criminal justice system. We're doing the best we can. We want to help our people. The answer is much bigger, and it's universal health care. We're starting to see that. So I hope that the ultimate answer doesn't come from the criminal justice system, because the ultimate answer, and again, this is personal feelings, we need, this country needs universal health care, and we need more housing. Right now, the criminal justice system will provide some Band-Aids, but that's not where the ultimate answer lies or should lie.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And it seems to me, listening to this conversation and also thinking about these particular situations, we're talking about this in-between situation where people are in distress. They are not a threat to themselves or others. They're not committing any crimes, but they're struggling. And then, of course, community members who are witnessing this, their first call is to call dispatch to try to get them services. And so I think in this particular case, where it is clearly a mental health issue, that's when we look at programs like Cahoots, which are more of a volunteer civilian mental health outreach dispatch versus a criminal law enforcement response, I think is more important, or an important thing to explore. And how do we implement this? The second, there's two other things, and I'll just throw them in here because I'm taking my window of opportunity while I can before I get muted again. The other population in terms of mental health is that fine line between people who are, we have a very highly, we have a large youthful population who are on medication. Whether they're coming into college, they take a fair amount of medication now. Maybe they aren't taking their pills when they should be, or maybe they're taking it with alcohol, or they haven't eaten enough, and then they get into a situation of distress. I've definitely been with police officers on ride-alongs when they've interacted with individuals who clearly had a combination of alcohol, drugs, and whatever pharmaceuticals that they were on, being a college student, living on their own for the first time. And that also is sort of this strange in-between area that is not, I don't even know how we think about that. But we do spend, the message I get from law enforcement is they do spend a lot of time dealing with these situations, trying to support these individuals. And then finally, when we're talking about housing and addiction recovery and all of those thresholds that barriers that people have to overcome, yes, we have a housing shortage, absolutely. Yes, we need to have more flexible housing in terms of people who are trying to transition into stable housing, whether or not it's wet housing, people who can bring their partners, their dogs. We have a large population of homeless individuals who are registered sex offenders. Very, very, very difficult for them to find housing. You know, there's a lot of constraints that we have to overcome. Many of these individuals are homeless. They may also have addiction and mental health problems. But you're absolutely right with regards to housing and needing to create those opportunities that can support people who aren't able to easily transition into housing because of various conditions that they're facing.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thanks.
Anna, did you have one more question from chat?
Yeah, so one more question came in. What becomes of the charges that they come to court with? Are they disposed of upon graduating from wellness court?
Matt, did you want to answer that, or did you want me to?
You can answer it, Judge.
There's various different outcomes. One outcome is what's called a contract. That's where there's agreement between Matt's office and the defendant, where basically if they're successful through the program, the charges can be dismissed or reduced. That's a pretty typical outcome. The other outcome is they simply avoid a more serious consequence if they come in with a criminal history that would normally require a jail sentence. Successful completion of our program can get them out with we call it a conditional discharge, a CD, where they just have to stay out of trouble and there's no probation. So there's various outcomes, but we typically have a lot of contract agreements with the DA's office, and that's the best outcome because often they result in a non-criminal disposition, either a dismissal or a plea to a violation level charge like disorderly conduct or something like that.
Thank you. I do have one final question. Since this is NAMI and we support and educate family members, I'm wondering from all of your perspectives, what families can do to help you in your positions. What can we do to make things better?
From my perspective, just communicate with my office. The more information we have, the better about an individual who's in our system, and also be there to support your family member.
All right. Well, I don't have any other questions in chat. Anna?
So if any of the panelists have any final thoughts before we conclude the evening.
Well, wellness court, as Judge Peacock mentioned, as is required of all courts in New York State, and I think most states, courts are public. So if anyone is interested in observing a mental health court, ethical wellness court session, you are welcome to. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. And we can provide court is every other Tuesday. I don't know if we have our 2021 schedule set yet. And it is in the afternoon. And I think for a while it's going to probably be virtual. So we can certainly get you the links if you wanted, you and family members or friends wanted to observe any sessions. Is that correct, Judge Peacock, Michelle?
Yes, you can contact Ithaca City Court and we can get you the information. We're using Microsoft Teams and it is open to the public,
So far, we have December 1st and December 15th, and then we're done for 2020. So if anybody wants in on those, just to observe, I think it's great. I mean, I think the more people know, and actually experience it, I think the understanding of what we're trying to do, is enhanced. So.
And you can also see it in all its glory with the glitches and frozen screens and all the fun things we all deal with on these calls.
We're a riot. I mean, we're really fun to watch. I mean.
Well, you all look like a terrific team, and this has been really enlightening and informative. I find it uplifting that there's such a committed team working together for better outcomes for our loved ones. That's very important to us. We've needed to have this sort of coordination for a very long time in Tompkins County, and the implementation of the wellness court has really been terrific for this community. So I really want to thank you all for that, and thank you all for attending this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Beth. Nice seeing you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
You too. Take care, everyone.